16 million colors. Wreak some havoc in your head.
All right. Greetings, junkies. Welcome to the Saturn Junkyard Titancast. My name is Brian, and I am joined today by Camron from Canada. How are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you.
And hailing from Portugal is Nuno. How are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you.
And again, you are listening to the Saturn Junkyard Titancast, your one-stop shop for news, commentary, personal stories, and more. I think that was the intro that that Sam had a long time ago, and I'm realizing that we don't really do news.
No.
Yeah, but we got the commentary, we got the personal stories, retrospectives. Like, I don't know, I think maybe if there's anything we do that's news, it's like we try to find new ways of appreciating old games. Maybe I don't know if I don't know. I feel like with news, I'll go to I don't know, Associated Press or Reuters or Stat is really good for health and science news. Axios is good. Oh yeah, and then video game news. I have no idea. What about you guys?
Video game news, I don't follow video game news because I don't play modern games. And if there's like retro news, it's like it pops up in like the Junkyard's main feed thing, right? Or it pops up on, not even on TikTok. Oh, it's just in the Facebook thing where I might see somebody be like, oh, did you know that, you can get this new adapter or this guy's working on this new project? So, news stories show up in the Junkyard.
Yeah, I'll see a lot of people post kind of their projects on Twitter. That's probably where I see a lot of that. But honestly, yeah, I'm terrible at keeping up with most video game news in general, not even just retro stuff. I mean, if you want Saturn news, I mean, I'll plug Shiro. I feel like our friends at Sega Saturn Shiro, they got the news. They got all those roundup.
Friday's at 4. Friday's at, I think, Friday's at 4? 4 o'clock, is it?
Yeah, that's the one with Dave and Patrick.
Yeah, and they run through news. You want news, they will run you through the news. They're like, this is the news for the week. That this guy did this. We dug this up. Like, here's an interview with somebody. I'm like, okay, so we're doing actual anchoring. So
no, that's awesome. I catch it when I can. Just a lot of times I'm so busy trying to wrap up the week with work. I can't really log in very much, but yeah, that's awesome that they do that, and I love how consistent and just on top of.
Yeah, I think they're on episode I want to say episode 50 or something ridiculous like that.
All right, so yeah, for Sega Saturn news, you got Shiro. Dreamcast news, our sister site, the Dreamcast Junkyard. They just recorded a news roundup episode of the Dream Pods, so you can listen to that. They'll post all of the developments on their blog when those break. We don't really kind of do that either, I think, on the blog or or any of our other media. I think we're just more focused on retrospective stuff.
I think it's always trying to be a personal take that we dive into, or very. I almost want to use the word obtuse.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll be just talking about a video game, say when we were talking about Hang On, or we had the motorcycle episode, and we were saying how rubber banding, and we're talking about what's the realistic thing that somebody's going to actually put rubber banding in a video game, or actually do something with the AI, and it's hypothesizing how things could be, or the rationale behind things, and it's is this actually something that people talk about?
I kind of like focusing on just a game at a time, and I guess it's a book club, game club style is what we probably had started doing pretty early on. But I don't know, I like that. It gives us a chance to play the games together and kind of explore new ways to talk about them or think about them, and then there's always hindsight as part of that. And I don't know, I don't think any of us are really too stuck in a bubble for retro stuff. I mean, I feel like we're always playing other things in addition to Saturn, and Saturn kind of fits within that broader zeitgeist for us. And it's kind of cool to come at those old games with the perspectives that we draw from newer games that come out. And a lot of times I think it's helped me appreciate how unique and interesting the Saturn was, and the niche that it did fill with a lot of the cool arcade style games and other easy to jump into, difficult to master type games that you don't really see as much anymore. Or if you do, you see them in the indie space, maybe the mobile space, but it's still like a go-to console for me for those very specific types of experiences that I appreciate even more as games overall have become a little more long form and progression heavy.
I agree, and I think there's a lot of room for those games to make a resurgence where replayability and easy to get into and hard to master become like more the norm again. You know, me myself, I don't want to play a game that's dedicated online or that's getting seasons of DLC or stuff like that. I want to play a game. I want to play it for 5 minutes or maybe a half an hour, get a little bit better at it, and then be able to come back to it. I like those kinds of games. Even when I was like I've got, like you said, you've got the Saturn, and when I downloaded the last game I downloaded for PS4 was Samurai Shodown, which is, again, it's that same style of game. It's like, am I going to play one round? Am I going to play 10?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's still that I feel like I've had that experience. I feel like I've enjoyed myself, and I feel like I can come back and keep enjoying myself. I don't have to invest, I don't have to buy a bunch of games or a bunch of DLC or a bunch of anything, necessarily.
And especially as publishers and developers pay homage with their projects to older games that resonated that way, or just as you're saying with Samurai Shodown, SNK literally re-releasing those games on every platform that comes out, and then also the curators and devs in between that really dive in and give those games kind of a, I don't know, almost like a museum type makeover. They'll preserve the original game, but then they'll also add a lot of behind the scenes stuff and a lot of material that adds context to appreciating those games.
Oh, I was talking about the 2019 Samurai Shodown, not any of the classic collections. I don't know if it's a remake. I think it's like a reboot, and they wanted it to be like an Evo game or something like that. But the whole idea is that it's not combo heavy. It's not going to be like Street Fighter or King of Fighter where you're using your rage gauge or your maximum gauge or whatever it is, your V gauge, to do an infinite 10, 20, 50 hit combo, and then it's all you have to learn these long strings and half circles and stuff like that. It's one of those easy to learn games. It's 4 buttons, but there's so much that you can do with that. And the way I was thinking about it the other day, it made me kind of laugh. It's the greatest version of rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock that you will ever play.
All right.
Right? That sounds crazy, but when you sit down and you play the game and you finally go through the tutorial and you learn what you're playing, it's basically you're waiting out your opponent. Because if you do one heavy strike, you can do half of your opponent's life gauge in one move. Right? If somebody gets hit the wrong way. So you can. It's about risk and reward. If I do this move, you can counter me with this move, but I can counter you with this move. You can counter me with this move. So there's all these stuff to counter and outdo your opponent, and it's who's going to hit who first, right?
Yeah.
So then it feels like rock, paper, scissors, but there's not just rock, paper, and scissors. There's a few more things. So that's why I said it's on the Big Bang, the rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, and it's just that's what that game is, and I love it. I've been having so much fun with it.
That kind of reminds me of Giant Graham. and the All Japan Pro Wrestling games. I think the Saturn received the first one, the featuring Virtua, that had Jeffrey and Wolf, I believe, and then there were a couple of entries on the Dreamcast. So I've been playing those, and they almost function similarly to what you're describing, where yeah, it is rock paper scissors. Like a grapple will beat a strike, which will beat a throw, and so. But then it's like, all right, well then once you have that, then you have to build on reversals with your opponent to ultimately execute your attack. So that's, I don't know, it's kind of it's a pretty fun mechanic, honestly.
Right, and I think just the idea that you don't have to learn like a 12 string or all these like infinite combos, and it's just like you're sitting there trying to basically think and outweight your opponent most of the time.
Yeah.
That builds its own level of fun.
And I feel like maybe Virtua Fighter kind of worked similarly, right? It was about being patient and, finding those openings and being on the defense as much as it was just pure attack and button mashing, right? And that's kind of what made those games a little more engaging for a lot of people.
I think I like Virtua Fighter 5U especially because it lets you use those three buttons, and without button mashing, but kind of with button mashing. You know what I mean? Like you could just press forward punch, back kick, forward punch, up kick, and it'll just do this little combo for you. Anything leads into anything, and everything leads into something. So you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna kind of button mash, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, that was.
But you're not. But you're still not. You're just putting in like you're playing with a timing or a rhythm, and you just like, oh, okay, this is really cool.
Well, on that note, Nuno, what have you been up to? What have you been playing these days?
Well, I've been playing Elden Ring like most of humanity has lately.
Same.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Have you finished it yet?
No, I got to the point where I know I'm going to kick off the end game if I go to, the next. I'm not going to give spoilers, but like I know I like it. Just makes it pretty clear that this is maybe not a point of no return, but it's like, all right, this is going to be, you're going to be busy for a while with end game stuff if you move forward. And so I did a lot of the side stuff like the desecrated snowfields and all of the other areas. And then I got to Millennia. And so now I'm like, basically those are the two things I'm chipping away and trying to beat Millennia, as a side boss, a very difficult side boss notoriously, and also a really fun one to try to learn. So I'm kind of like there where I'm going to take a break, but when I return to it, I'll do one of those two, or I'll probably do both of those things. But yeah, where are you at with it?
I wouldn't call it fun. I'm actually at probably exactly the same place where you are. I first explored the mountaintops of the giants and then got to the point where I kind of thought that if I do this action, I may trigger the end game, and I knew that I still had items to pick up in Lanedale, and I also had the Alley Tree to explore yet, so I focused on that, and I just got to Malenia actually before this podcast, like an hour before recording this podcast. And she's kicking my ass, and I almost beat her second form once. It was just this tiny bit of health left, and I just couldn't make it, and I just got so mad. I mean, goddamn. Let me go back a little. So, yeah, if you guys, to the people listening at home, if you remember our last podcast, I was kind of in a rut when it came to games. I kind of had this long-winded monologue about not being playing anything recently and being kind of fed up with games and all of that. And then I think it was in that exact same week that we recorded that podcast that Elden Ring came out. And I decided to give it a try. It's not my first Souls game. I played actually every Souls game before this, with the exception of Bloodborne and Sekiro, which are not actually Souls games, in the sense that they're not like Demon Souls or Dark Souls. They're kind of offshoots of the main branch, let's say. But by the time that I was finishing Dark Souls 3, I beat the main campaign, but not the DLC. I played both DLCs for Dark Souls 3, but didn't beat either. And it was because I was kind of getting exhausted of this type of game. Like being on edge all the time, always having to bring your best game, um, dying constantly, having to memorize enemy patterns constantly. I was just kind of feeling exhausted by that. So I didn't feel like playing a game like that for a long time. And then Elden Ring, at first I was kind of curious because I thought Elden Ring was going to be a different style of game. It was still going to be very much inspired by those games, but I was thinking it was going to be something different. If you remember back when it was first announced, we knew literally nothing about it, except that the plot was being written by George R.R. Martin, which I can't see his plot anywhere. If you had told me that this was just written by Miyazaki as the previous Souls game, I would have believed it, because I can't see his input anywhere. So when I then started playing Elden Ring, I was kind of disappointed that it felt so much like Dark Souls 4. It was like a Dark Souls through and through, and I just wasn't in that mindset anymore. But then I almost I almost quit it. Um, I almost stopped playing. But then something clicked for me, and I got into it. I found myself getting into it, getting into a certain, let's say, a rhythm of exploring the map, of leveling up my character, of spicing up my gameplay. And yeah, I really got into it. So far, I've been playing for over 70 hours. My character is almost level 150. And yeah, I've obviously been liking it a lot, although it's not without its flaws. I would say that for me, the biggest win for this game is definitely the move to an open world, which was a risky move because previous games were famous for this structure. Like, linear in a way, but not so much because the levels were all interconnected. Um, and the move to open world was a ballsy one. It definitely took guts on their part, but I think it paid off. It was definitely the right move. So much that I think that it's one of those moves that once a game goes there, it kind of feels hard to go back to a linear style. Because yeah, I just think the open world structure, both in terms of gameplay, how satisfying it is to explore the world, also in terms of visual style. This is fantasy, but not like a fantasy grounded in reality, like let's say Witcher 3, which I love that style by the way. But this is like high fantasy, really crazy fantasy, where you see just crazy stuff that couldn't exist in the real world and doesn't obey the rules that we know about the world. It's really crazy fantasy, very, very imaginative. It's also in some ways the easiest Souls game to date, I think, because it gives you more tools to work with. You can customize your character and play in new ways that you really couldn't before. And also because you got Spirit Ashes, which are NPC summons. So if you're playing offline, Spirit Ashes make all the difference in the world. Even just by the fact that they distract bosses away from you, so you're not being constantly pounded by the boss and you have room to breathe, that by itself makes all the difference in the world for a noob like me.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head of why I like that game so much too. But yeah, go ahead. I can add my thoughts later.
No problem, man. I was just going to say that at the same time, it still has frustrating moments. I actually think the very beginning of the game was probably a turn off for some players. Without spoiling anything, well, it's the beginning of the game, so it's not exactly a spoiler, but you finish the tutorial, which actually was a bit obtuse. I just found out that they, in a recent update, they actually made it very clear that you're supposed to go one way to actually get through the whole tutorial instead of missing it that going the other way, because apparently a lot of people were missing the fact that you should jump down the bottom. I didn't miss that because I was just after 4 Souls game, Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 to 3, I was already into the level design, but I can totally see a new player missing that. But then when you first get to the open world, you immediately see a high level enemy that is going to pound your ass, and it's just provoking you to try to fight him, but it's just going to absolutely wreck you. And then you get to the giant on the road to the castle that made me stop in my tracks for a bit, and I had to explore and just go the other way because I could have just ran past him, but didn't want to play that way. I wanted to beat him, and it took me a while. And then you get to Margit, which is the first proper boss, and he also is a bit of a roadblock. So there are so many frustrating beats right at the beginning of the game, and then I think it kind of levels out, or maybe it was just because of my playstyle and the way I leveled up my character. I think it gives you a lot of freedom in how you play and how you level up your character, but at the same time, there are clearly right ways to play and wrong ways to play, and the game is going to punish you hard if you're playing it wrong. For example, if you're playing with a magic build, it's easy mode. You just stand back and blast the enemies with magic, and it's just easy mode basically. I went for a pure strength build, which is not so feasible in this game as it was in previous Souls games. So there were points where I felt like that I was really being punished for not playing the game as it wanted me to play it. But still, I think that for the middle of the game, the difficulty also averages out a bit. Probably because you also have freedom to explore different areas and level up your character. And then when you get back on track, you're probably a bit over leveled compared if you went straight that way. But the game still likes to punish you from time to time. And yeah, I just got to Millennia and I'm pissed. So yeah, that's Elden Ring for me. It has many amazing aspects to it. It's definitely a hell of an experience. But if you're not even if you're coming from previous Souls games, it's still going to be challenging. And I can't imagine a new player getting into this, which I know that people have been getting into this for the first time because it just broke record sales everywhere. So a lot of people are coming into Elden Ring for the first time. And I feel sorry for them because just going back, I'm going to shut up because I've been talking about this for a long time. But just going back to the beginning of the game, there are so many crucial things that you can miss. For example, just unlocking the act of leveling up your character depends on you resting at the sites of grace. If you don't rest at a specific number of sites of grace, you won't trigger what was her name, Milan or something, and she won't allow you to level up your character. If you don't go back after triggering her, if you don't go back to the first church of Marika, you won't trigger arena, so you won't get your spirit ashes. If you don't go down into that cellar, you won't unlock the item that you need to apply ashes of war to your weapons. If you don't remember to buy a
This sounds
torch,
like an open world. This sounds like an open world Metroid game to me. You know, I have to explore this area and then I have to backtrack. If I didn't get this thing, now I have to find this tool so that I can get to this area in this part of the game. But if I didn't, now I'm stuck and can't get there.
yeah, I was just going to give you one last example, which is I can totally see a new player going into like one of the first caverns, which are pitch black, and being confused by why can't they see anything. You're supposed to first buy a torch from the first merchant. It's stuff like this that they are kind of obvious for a seasoned Souls game. When I saw that torch, I immediately knew that I needed to buy it because I knew I was going to need it later. But it's the stuff that a new player can totally miss. And I think the beginning of the game is just too obtuse for players who are still... I'm not even complaining about stuff that I miss because although I almost missed the Rena encounter and the Spirit Ashes, so that would have been a pain. But the other stuff I figured out myself. But I just... it's an example of how the game can be really, really obtuse. And don't even let me get started on the quests, because there are quests that you can fail at so many points that unless you kind of follow a guide, some of the more long-winded quests, like Rani's quest, for example, there are so many failed states that if you don't do something at a specific time, you just will miss that opportunity and the quest will be broken. You won't be able to finish it. It's stuff that kind of hampers the experience, in my view. But that's it for me. I still love the game. I'm still playing it, and I still love the game.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I did literally all of those things in a way, like that a newbie would do. I missed the tutorial. I went the opposite way as soon as I exited the opening, shrine or whatever it was. And I had the time of my life, just figuring out what the fuck to do next. I think the opacity of that game for me was one of its biggest strengths because that is something that I miss dearly about open world design for especially Ubisoft games or other things or other games these days that are just very specific about waypoints and what to do next and how to who to talk to and I love that I just love that it gave me none of that. And it made exploring new things and finding those breadcrumbs all the more rewarding to me. And it kind of harkens back to a lot of my connection with Breath of the Wild and Morrowind and games that were more, as you were saying, obtuse in a way because they, just kind of said, hey, here's our open world, figure it out. And I fucking love that about Elden Ring too. And there was something about that level of, I don't know, that level of freedom and those, all those question marks that were always out there of like, oh, I saw that one person, what the hell were they talking about? Or I saw that place, I have no idea what to do there. There were just all these question marks that would kind of build up as I was exploring the world that always gave me something to go back to when I hit a wall or hit a boss that was kicking my ass or got to an area where I was in over my head. And especially, with the horse, I forget your, or whatever, your undead horse, I forget the name of.
Torrent.
Yeah, Torrent. I mean, I loved how if I just got into a, legacy dungeon, quote unquote, which are like self-contained areas that operate more or less like miniature Souls levels, I imagine. I don't know, I could like, if I ever got to a point where I was like frustrated or wasn't progressing or hitting my head against the wall, I could just ride Torrent around the other way, go find something else to do, go pick, I don't know, just pick up random crafting materials, go kill lower level enemies, go find other bosses that I could exploit that were, easier to make progress on. And also I was playing easy mode, especially in the early game. I was full on astrologer, developing into full mage. So yeah, I was casting rocks and all of that shit at enemies all the time. And I loved that. And I thought it was nice for somebody like me who doesn't typically play these games a lot, just kind of getting into the world and breaking down some of those barriers to exploring it. Cause you're right. It does make the game easier to be able to launch a bunch of stones at enemies from afar before you have to engage them close. But then also I think, I don't know, at a certain point later on, I was very interested in, I think I got like the Moonveil Katana and a dagger and a couple other weapons, some staves and stuff that I really liked. So I was like, oh, you know what? I kind of want to build strength and dex and do a little more with those as well. So I'm having a good time kind of developing that play style in addition to it. So yeah, just the flexibility and the freedom of being able to explore not just spatially, but like how you play the game and evolve that over time is really what kind of is making that game so special to me.
Let me just say, since you spoke about the horse, calling it Torrent was a genius move. Because if you want to pirate the game and you go on Google and search for Elden Ring Torrent, you won't get what you want.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't even think about that. That's awesome. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting hearing you talk about it, though. Since you are pretty seasoned in the Souls games, so it is really funny to hear you kind of talk about having pretty much the opposite experience that I did, but also, ultimately at the same place together in a way, despite our
Yeah, I
paths
think.
diverging so drastically.
Yeah, you mentioned something important about one of the strengths about the open world structure, which is if you're frustrated at a certain point, if you can't go past a certain boss or whatever, you can just go explore. I think that's why I'm so pissed at Millennia, because I have nothing left to explore. I just want
Yeah,
to beat her and then go trigger the end game, and I'm just
same.
stuck trying to beat her.
I really ultimately appreciated how I don't know how many ways I could fail differently in Elden Ring, and at some point I just stopped being frustrated because I was dying in really clever and surprising ways that most of them my fault. I would just kind of misjudge a situation or underestimate an enemy or a jump and just die constantly. And after a while, I was more amused than frustrated with all of that. And I think that became kind of a core part of the process of just learning to approach things differently and try new things and really expand like how I strategize and trying to learn from some of those fuck ups. I don't know, that process was just really fun, and I really liked dying in Elden Ring, I guess. Long story short. I'm looking forward to finishing it and then just doing New Game Plus and trying a completely different play style. So I'm pretty excited to
Oh,
move
I
on.
will definitely play as a mage in New Game Plus.
All right. So, yeah, I don't know, Cameron, you were talking about earlier before we recorded, you had picked up a new piece of kit for your Sega Saturn slash, I don't know if you're using it on Dreamcast, but I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
I do. The other day I was looking for an arcade stick. Since I've been playing Samurai Shodown and getting into not that I'm getting into, but I'm taking more seriously is fighting games because I've been generally just quarter circle and whatever. I've never taken time to learn the actual mechanics of the games. So I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna do that, maybe I need an arcade stick. So then I believe you recommended that I get the Brook Wingman adapter and just be like, oh, just get that. Then you can use whatever kind of thing you need for Saturn. And I'm like, oh, for Saturn, right? So I knew that the Brook Wingman was a thing. Don't get me wrong, that's one of those news articles that I've seen. But I didn't think that I would appreciate it as much as I have. And if you haven't heard of what it is, for those listening, it's essentially a wireless adapter that lets you use PlayStation 3, 4, maybe 5 Xbox Series controllers with your Sega Saturn and Sega Dreamcast. And it is as good as advertised. I mean, I have a PlayStation 4, so I just have a second controller lying around. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll use this for the Wingman, and I'll use the other one for the PlayStation. And I've played Dreamcast with it, and I've played Saturn with it, and it's sometimes, in some aspects, it's better than the stock pads because your PlayStation pad isn't 25 years old with worn membranes and stuff like that, and it's got a little bit of more modern kit hiding under there. Just before the show, I was playing Shinobi. And there were a few points where I'm like, well, this was way easier just based on the controller I'm using. Well, that was weird. It's been excellent. It's been excellent for Dreamcast for playing King of Fighters or Jet Grind Radio. Anything on Dreamcast feels so just intuitive with the PS4 controller because it's the joystick's there, the D-pad's there, the 4 buttons are there. Your shoulder triggers are there. All the buttons are still mapped the same way. so you don't have to like relearn anything to play with this controller. And I thought it was even interesting that I felt like even just playing Burning Rangers, I tried it in both like the standard controller mode and in 3D pad mode. And either way felt just fine with the PlayStation controller, and I thought that was kind of weird too, where it was like, oh, you know, you can play this game with a D-pad. You don't need a 3D pad to play this game. You just need a better D-pad, I guess. And I was like, oh. And I felt like, am I questioning how I feel about like the Saturn controller or about the Dreamcast controller? And I'm like, is this going to make me feel awkward from now on? Like, I don't know.
My stance is whatever helps me stop thinking about the controller and the input devices, that is what I'm going to use. And so if that means using a PlayStation 4 controller or a 360 controller for 3D Saturn games, I'm going to fucking do it. Because honestly, those analog sticks are way better than the original Saturn 3D pad. And it's funny because like some of the 3D games like Burning Rangers or whatever, I mean they are legit easier, but also they're responsive and like really nuanced in their analog stick use that I never really appreciated with the original Saturn pad because it just wasn't as precise. But like those games were programmed that way. Like just does a great job giving you options to continue playing those games long after all the Saturn 3D pads and their membranes have worn out and are useless. It's like, well, at least we can keep playing those games on original hardware with other controllers.
I also think it kind of makes me wonder if part of the air quote jank of old video games has anything to actually do with the game's programming or anything to do with like the controllers of the time themselves now.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, if I'm having an easier time playing an old game, is it the game's fault or is it the controller's fault actually? So when you hear all those guys being like, it's my controller, and they're like, no, John's, maybe John had a point.
I mean, that's a good question, right? And a lot of times the development was kind of informed by the hardware, and maybe informed the hardware, itself. I'm sure I'm sure Sonic Team was working pretty closely with whoever at Sega was developing the 3D pad to, make sure that it was working for that game as a showcase, and developing that technology to be at least as adaptive or accommodating as it could. But the mid 90s were a very different time, and we didn't really have the same understanding of how that tech should work, and I'm sure we didn't really have the same ability to make them as precise or reliable as some of the tech today. So there was probably just a lot of factors layering on top of each other that added challenges to that. What games do you feel like it's made the most difference for you?
I think it's made the most difference on Dreamcast specifically. Like that's where I've noticed it become the most apparent that I have a better controller in my hand, where it's like, oh, these moves may feel easier to pull off, or this doesn't feel as like it's as challenging of a game as when I was younger, or even like from like a year ago or something like that. So those feelings are more noticeable on the Dreamcast, where on the Saturn, I don't know if it's because of the 6 buttons and you have to use the shoulders for Z and C, but it feels like it's like you're playing a Saturn game on PS4. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I still don't feel like I'm playing on Saturn. It feels smoother. It feels like I'm connected to the game. Like, don't get me wrong. But in such a way that it almost feels like you're not even playing on original hardware anymore.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? So it makes it kind of weird. Like, also you're like, now you're playing Saturn with a wireless pad, right? Which obviously people play Saturn with a wireless pad these days because of like Retrobit and like all those other things. Like there's options, but at the same time you're sitting there like, what? This is weird. Why am I wireless from my Saturn? Like wireless from Dreamcast, just it didn't feel like I was detached from it. I still felt very connected to the Dreamcast, but with Saturn, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that, right? Because we remember those experiences and really love those games, warts and all, right? And some of the jankiness from that hardware or the original hardware, you can't. Sometimes you can't always separate that.
I can't, and it's funny because I had that same problem with the N64. They had have you ever heard of the Brawler Pad?
Yeah, I got a couple of those.
Right. When it first came out, I ordered one and I got one of the version 2. So everything was like all fixed up. It's all the buttons are going to work. It's whatever. And I noticed just like, you know how you're saying, like you play with the controller that you don't notice that you're playing with the controller, right? And the more I played with the Brawler Pad, the more I noticed that I was playing with not an N64 controller.
Yeah.
Um, and the difference is only so subtle, and it's just the way the controller was designed. When they made the joystick on the N64, it's actually an oval, right? It's not a circle. Like the gate's just like this oval shape, like an egg or something like that. And with the Brawler, it's an actual perfect circle. So when you put the controller into those positions where it's supposed to be an oval, but it's now a circle, all the games are programmed to pick it up as an oval. So now you're giving it a circle or something like that. So when you go left or you go right or you do certain maneuvers, they're like just slightly off of how the original controller would respond. And since I've been playing those games since I was a child, I instantly noticed. I'm like, what's wrong with my controller? Is it broken? Is there something wrong? No, there's not something wrong with the controller per se. It's just like the controller and the game aren't talking the same. Like when you said like the Saturn games were programmed for that level of like degree of like accuracy that the PS4 can give it. The Brawler Pad was giving more accuracy, I guess, than the N64 wanted, and it's like, no, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. I think you're right too. And the other part of that is the notches, because I think the Nintendo 64 pad had that a little bit with the 8-way notches on the outside. Although you could still move the stick pretty freely in other directions beyond that. But the GameCube one was the one that's really limited because like you pull the analog, just a full pull in any direction and it's going to notch into one of 8 directions. And I don't know to what degree games were actually developed to work that way. Because it seems like if you played a GameCube or Nintendo 64 games with another controller like that, it would give it a level of precision that you're exactly right. That like maybe the devs were kind of just working around, even if they would have wanted their game to have more free motion.
Right, so you're playing like Banjo-Kazooie and you press it up to the one direction and all of a sudden his like run and walk become like almost like the same thing and the game's like, I don't know what you want from me. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, game. I'm going to put a regular controller back in. I'm terribly sorry for that.
For the Dreamcast games, have you played you made use of the second analog stick as for the face button proxy for games like I don't know MDK or 2 or Outrigger or ones that would.
I didn't even realize that was like an option because I did have Outrigger. I was like, oh, I'm gonna try Outrigger with this, and I was so excited because I was like, now I can like whatever. But then I tried to use just like whatever the basic, because they don't label it really well in that game. Like it's A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, and you have to kind of like guess what that means, right? So now you're trying to guess, and you're trying to kind of, as much as it's like the same, you're still trying to like translate that to the PS4 controller. Because the first time I tried to do it, it's like your move set to the D-pad, but like aiming is set to the the left joystick, so you're trying to shoot but move with the same thumb.
Yeah.
Which I guess on Dreamcast isn't so hard because it's flipped around, so you just like move your thumb up to like do whatever, but now you're moving it down and it's a completely different motion. I don't know. It felt really weird. So I'm like, I still have to mess around with that and find a way that works better for playing Outrigger because I think maybe that, like you said, that dual analog stick might make that game better.
Yeah, and another game that was kind of that way was Fur Fighters for me. It's like any game that lets you put strafe and movement forward and back on the face buttons is going to be kind of like adaptable for that. And I think Outrigger has like you said, like has one setting that kind of gets there. Fur Fighters does that too. But the problem for me is being right-handed is I'm not used to having movement on the right side and aiming on the left. And I don't think there's a way to. I mean, maybe they could do an update. I don't know, but I'd be surprised if there's a way to swap the control sticks and let the right stick simulate aiming and the left stick simulate the face buttons. But that would be amazing if they ever did that.
And
maybe
then
they do.
the other
They just haven't messed with it.
The other weird thing was I was trying to use the keyboard for Outrigger, and they have like different keyboard settings, and most of them make you use like the D-pad or the keypad or the number pad for your walking, and then you have to use your mouse for aiming. So I'm like, what? I'm like, so either you want me to use my right hand for walking and aiming, and shooting, or it's like now I have to move the keyboard over here so that I can like have my hands near each other or something like that. I don't know. It's a ridiculous game for controlling. So
I'm trying to remember. Was just the WASD, was that like as commonplace in the early 2000s in the same way?
It wasn't, because in Outrigger it's not ASDW, right? It's ASDE, and E is above your left or whatever, or your right button. So you're like, oh, I'm going right, and now it's right and up, not. So I think at that time those things weren't standard, and people were just kind of like making it up as this might work. Sure, why not? Let's give them some options.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, that was kind of true of a lot of aspects of things that we consider very basic functions of control schemes and things today. Like they were still figuring all that shit out back then.
Well, that's funny because like back in January, I tried to get my mom to play video games with me for the first time, kind of thing. And I had been hearing about Spyro, and it was on sale, and I'm like, oh, I'll get Spyro. That makes total sense. And I watched this documentary on YouTube, and it says that like how Spyro originally became popular was not kids getting into Spyro, it was adults getting into Spyro and then giving it to their kids, right? So I went, oh, perfect. That sounds like a game for adults then. And then I didn't realize though that the game assumes that you understand that the one joystick is for the camera and the other joystick is for motion. Where back on PlayStation, they were still trying to figure that stuff out, so you might not have one of those analog controllers, so the camera was like in control of itself, right? And like you could turn the camera, like tilt it with like the left and right triggers, right? So the new game assumes that you know stuff. So when my mom's trying to play this game, she can control Spyro or the camera, but not both.
Yeah.
So that was kind of funny too, in one of those concepts of we've designed this thing, it's become commonplace, but it assumes that you know it, that you've been there.
Yeah, exactly. It assumes that your lived gaming experiences have just, have made that second nature for you in a way that probably isn't true for everybody.
Right.
At any rate, we should probably, with the time you have left, we should probably switch over to House of the Dead remake. Is there anything else you wanted to speak to, Camron, on that, or should we?
What, on House of the Dead?
No, on Wingman.
No, it's a fabulous product, and if you can get your hands on it for your Saturn or your Dreamcast or your OG Xbox or something like that, I think it's a wonderful product that can. I'm not going to say extend the life of your games, because I don't think that's true. I think it's just going to make gaming more comfortable for you.
Like if you don't want to run out and try to chase down a new Dreamcast controller or a new Saturn controller, you have options.
Yeah, like Elden Ring, the Wingman SD gives you, I don't know, a breadth of new ways to engage with those games.
Exactly.
I guess that's probably enough shilling for for something we're not being paid to advertise. But
Yeah, right.
if we go on any longer, we should see if Brook can throw
He
something
throws
our
another
way.
one.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nuno, I think we are ready for the main event. We can spend the rest of the time chatting about. Really, this is the impetus for us being here in the first place for this episode, and that is the recently released, depending on when you hear this, House of the Dead remake. It was the original game, House of the Dead, obviously, I don't think needs much of an introduction as a zombie-filled light gun shooter. It was originally developed by Sega's AM1, and it was directed by Takashi Oda. And they would go on to make the subsequent House of the Dead. I think at least the second one, and I can't remember if the same team was still around for the third one. But at any rate, the remake is published by Forever Entertainment, who also did the recent Panzer Dragoon remake a couple of years ago, and the developer likewise is Megapixel Studio, who I believe they develop both projects as well. I think just with that, we can jump right into it. Nuno, what's been your experience so far?
I like it. So far, I like it. Just to be blunt, I started it without having played the original game for a while. So I was going just from memories from a long time ago. I hadn't played it recently. And the first thing that struck me was that it's one of those kinds of remakes that where the graphics are completely rebuilt from the ground up, but the base game, the actual gameplay and the structure is still very much the same. So it's not just a simple remaster where the original graphics are just running at a higher resolution and higher frame rate. They have been completely redone from the ground up, but it's also not one of those remakes that completely redesigns the original game. Like, for example, Tomb Raider Anniversary, it was very much inspired by the original game and still followed the same basic general strokes, but the actual level layouts were completely different to also fit the new style of gameplay, the new movement that your character had. So this is that middle ground where the graphics themselves have been completely remade, but the gameplay is still, and the structure of the game is still very much the same. And because a light gun shooter, an on rails game, is the actual progress of the game is set by the game itself. You just shoot at the screen. You don't physically control your character or the camera. I would actually love to have them side by side, the original and this one, and see how closely it follows the original. Because just going from memory, actually afterwards I did replay the original because it got me so into it playing the remake that I actually wanted to get the original experience again, to try it again and have a more better base for a comparison. But still I haven't put them side by side, and I would love to do that because just from my first impression it seems to follow the original bit by bit. Like the design of the levels and the way you progress to the levels, it seems to be a perfect recreation of that, only with better graphics. And I just love that. That's by far my favorite type of remake. I just love this, and I just love that Sega in general has been doing these remakes. I mean, not doing them per se because they're not being done in house. I think they're being contracted to other developers. Yeah, but they started with Panzer Dragoon and now House of the Dead, and I love that they're kind of resurrecting these series that have been laying dormant, especially Panzer Dragoon. House of the Dead actually had a new arcade game release a few years ago, Scarlet Dawn. But at least when it comes to the home market, House of the Dead has been laying dormant ever since House of the Dead 4 came out on the PS3. So it's been a long time that we've had since we've had a House of the Dead for a home console or PC. In my case, I've been playing it on the PC, and I just love that Sega is breathing new life into these franchises, and that they're going back to the original entries, the original games that are very much connected to the Saturn. Panzer Dragoon even more so because it was actually developed as a Saturn exclusive. Also, that was ported from the arcades, and we can talk a bit about that part. I think it's interesting, and also as to kind of juxtapose with the recent remake, because we've also never had a proper one-to-one faithful port of the original arcade House of the Dead, which probably should be mentioned. So we have the original Saturn port, which was downgraded. I won't go more into that for now. We can talk about it later. But and now we have a remake. And yeah, in general, I just love it. I love how faithful it stayed to the original in terms of structure. I love the art style. This is obviously up to everyone's taste. It's not like an obvious choice. There is no obvious solution to this. How do you pick up a game that originally came out in 1996 for arcade hardware that had original come out in 1993 and you update it to 2022 graphics? So it's not so much about how realistic or how detailed it is, but more so I think what kind of art style do you choose to convey this type of game? Let's not forget that the story is campy as hell. It's not a game that you take seriously, despite the horror theme. And I think overall I'm very, very pleased with this game. And I think the gameplay itself is just kind of timeless. The basic gameplay of a light gun shooter, it's the type of game that never goes out of fashion, although these games have been kind of fell on the wayside as the gaming landscape progressed. It's not a very popular game nowadays, style of game I mean, but I think it's an awesome game. And unfortunately they're kind of hampered by the controls. You guys originally started talking about the Switch release because it first came out on the Switch a couple of weeks before coming out on consoles, on other consoles. I mean, PS4, I guess, and Xbox One. I don't really know. I guess.
I think it's out on everything now, but yeah, it was.
Yeah,
I was playing it on the Switch.
yeah, it's still that kind of transition between generations where popular games kind of come out on everything. I'm playing it on the PC, so I can play with the mouse, which I think after a proper light gun is the best way to play it. I don't think that it's a game that is satisfying to play. This is just my opinion. There are ways that you can replace the original controllers. For example, if you're talking about racing games, the best way to play them is obviously with a wheel. But if you're playing with a gamepad, I think that's still satisfying to play with a gamepad. There are actually some very specific racing games that I prefer to play with a gamepad. But if we're talking about replacing a proper light gun with a gamepad, that never sat right with me. And although that's way better nowadays with an analog stick than it was back in the day on the Saturn with a digital D-pad, even then I don't think it's a satisfying way to play these types of games for me. So I was really waiting for the PC version, not just because it's my main platform nowadays. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the Switch version lets you just tap on the screen to shoot, which I think it's such an obviously missed opportunity. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Can you do that?
I actually don't know. I haven't tried it that way. If they have an update that lets you do that, maybe that's an option. But no, I've just been using the Joy-Cons and also the Pro controller in hopes that maybe it was more responsive and you wouldn't need to recenter the controls as much. But spoiler alert, neither of those things really are that great, honestly. So no, I don't think you can tap the screen, but that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that's insane that they didn't go that route. I think it's so obvious. Because I don't have a Switch, but it does have a touchscreen, right? I'm not mistaken.
Yep, it does.
Yeah, I mean, why not do that? I mean, you obviously run the risk of just fucking up your screen, tapping it all over the place in quick succession. But still, I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about the remake?
Overall, I also really like it, and probably for very different reasons that you do, honestly. And just taking a step back, like I always wonder with these types of projects, when I first start playing them, or even when they first announce them, and we get a sense of what they're seeking to do with the project. Are they trying to replicate the experience as we remember it? Are they trying to preserve it for a new generation of players, or expand the net of audiences who can now enjoy these games? I always wonder what's the driving purpose of a remake for really any remake, right? Like, what is the developer trying to do? And I can't really speak for Megapixel and the other studios involved, but I mean, it seems like they were, as you were saying, going for a pretty beat for beat replication of that experience. Another wrinkle we should mention here is, and why we probably haven't seen a House of the Dead just remaster of the arcade original, is that source code, as far as I know, doesn't exist anymore. I think Sega lost it among a lot of other.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah. I think there's a
Damn.
good reason why we haven't seen a playable version of the arcade game at home till now. And so, yeah, remakes are generally the easiest option on the table at this point. At any rate, I just get a sense that there was maybe like some tension between trying to preserve the original experience as it was versus, I don't know, doing something new with it that would give new and returning players like something to kind of be surprised by, or something to really like engage us in new ways, or really communicate why light gun games are still awesome in 2022. And I don't know if the project, or if House of the Dead remake quite achieved all of those goals, but what I really do like is actually is actually the ways that it is different. And so they added a horde mode, which adds a lot more zombies in certain sequences. And it's not all the time. It's like really in specific areas. You'll be, where there were 2 zombies before, there may be 6 or 7. And then the other thing they changed, or they give you an option for a modern scoring system, which does kind of a chain-based sort of multiplier, which is actually kind of cool compared to the original scoring system. And so I honestly would play it with those 2 things enabled, horde mode and the modern scoring. I would also turn on auto reload, because one of the challenges, at least with the Switch version, and again, I think this is either a technical limitation or something that maybe they're still working on optimizing with the Joy-Con or with the motion controls, but it drifts like crazy. And I've tried a bunch of different control figurations, newer and older Joy-Cons, and they all have the same issues. And so I constantly have to click the control stick to recenter the reticule. And so I do that about as often as I would need to reload generally. So I was like, well, if I have to do one thing, I'll make sure I can just click that every now and then, rather than have to reload on top of that. So honestly, that just those options enabled have really made me engaged with the game that in ways I didn't expect. Like, I really feel like the cadence of it is now with the horde mode is keeps me on my toes a little more, because the ebbs and flows between when there's a ton of enemies on screen versus the relatively quieter moments are more extreme now, and you don't always know when more enemies will pop up. So it's I don't know, it just adds an element of surprise that I was really looking for, being so familiar with the original. And I ultimately really like playing it that way. So kudos to them. Honestly, I really do like it overall, and I hope that they're able to optimize the controls a little bit, as we were both mentioning.
Cam, have you played it?
I have not played the remake yet. I was super interested. I wanted to pick it up, but then I wasn't sure how the controls were going to work for PS4. And I have the original game for Saturn, and then I have the Stunner, and I have a CRT. So when I have the original game and I play that, I want to play it with the light gun, and I want to play it and shoot zombies like that way. So unless there's like some way to kind of replicate that experience on PS4, like, because I heard they hadn't like put in move controls yet, and then I don't have the move myself, so it's like if I want to get the game now, I have to get the game and the move, right? Which isn't expensive. I'm not going to say that it's a price thing that's keeping me away from it. It's just, how does it work? Does it work as well as my light gun does with the CRT?
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't work like the Brook Wingman kind of thing where it's a better experience because it's newer technology. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I don't have problems with my Wii U Pro controllers, or not Pro, my Wii U Motion Plus things or whatever they were called on the Nintendo Wii U. For the not the Joy-Cons. Joy-Cons? Joy-Cons. The Wiimote.
I think Wii U just uses the Wiimote, yeah.
Yeah, the Wiimote. So with the Wiimote Plus, like, I've been playing Metroid Prime a little, and it's pretty spot on. So I'm like, unless it's like at least that good, or at least as good as whatever, I don't know how I feel about it, or I'd feel about comfortable picking it up. Like, because I don't want to use like whatever gyro or makeshift control schemes they've put in.
Yeah, honestly, for you, Cam, I would wait until they confirm the move support that's updated into the PS4 version. I feel like that would probably be, my guess is that would be more reliable or easier for them to optimize than the Joy-Cons in their current state. I think it's not necessarily comparable to the Wii tech. In some ways, I think the Wii, especially with the Wii Plus remotes, or whatever that's called, I feel like that's aged a little better, because I can. And really, let me just sidebar here. If you want to play a lot of good light gun games at home and you don't have a Wii or Wii U for that matter, just buy one. Just because there are so many awesome light gun shooters for those systems, or for Wii specifically, including a lot of Sega ones. Of course, you have
House of the Dead 1 and 2.
Yeah, well, 2 and 3. They don't have one.
Oh, 2. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was 1 and 2.
Yeah, I wish. And then Overkill I do like, although I do prefer probably the PS3 version of that. But and I do think the Move technology is really good for light gun games, so we'll see if they're able to incorporate that. I think that would be really awesome for House of the Dead remake. But honestly, for Wii, I was playing LA Machineguns earlier. They have like a combo Gunblade New York, LA Machineguns, and that game fucking rocks. Holy shit, I love that game. I don't know if you all played it in arcades.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like, I didn't like the idea of the Wii motion control at the beginning, and I thought it was really, like, cheesy and hokey. So for the whole, like, Wii's life, I was like, pan the Wii, right? And then I get the Wii U, and they have the Motion Plus and all this other stuff in it, and I'm going, maybe I'll try it. Maybe. Right? So now I'm trying it with, like, Metroid and with all these other games, and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah. Oh, Pikmin, actually.
It's pretty good.
Not a shooter, but Pikmin is amazing. And all the Pikmin games, 1, 2, I think they have the Wii version.
Pikmin 3.
And 3 works really well with it, yeah.
Right? And so there's a bunch of games that, like, on the Wii U that need the Motion Plus. So when I started using motion controls, I'm like, okay, I may have to apologize for being mad about the Wiimote.
No, it's good, and I'm surprised at how, I mean, obviously it's not the most precise thing in the world. We've come a long way, especially with VR controls these days, but for what they needed to be for a lot of those arcade-style experiences, or light gun games, holy shit, they're awesome. And then there's also, like, adapters and things you can kind of slot the Wii remote into to kind of make it a little more like a light gun.
Yeah, because I have the Wii U, I have like Kabbalah's, the 2 Kabbalah games or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And dude, I so want the shotgun thing for it just because it adds to that whole experience of like sitting down and waiting in the bush and like having it sat there kind of thing, and it really does set that whole mood for you. And I was totally
Cool.
like not ready for that.
Have you played Ghost Squad?
On which
Wii. It's another Sega.
no, I haven't. That's the thing. I haven't. The only like Sega game I think I've really played on Wii was Mad World, which was amazing.
Yeah, no, Mad World is awesome. What was the other one? The Conduit games? I didn't really get into them, but I
Yeah, I think there's two of them. I think there's Conduit 1 and 2. Yeah.
feel like those might be pretty cool. I mean, if Metroid, I don't know. I don't know how many first person shooters with like, locomotion, separate from aiming. I just don't know how well or what that range of quality is and how they work for
Right?
me.
Like that goes like back to what I was kind of saying where like can you do the two things? Like yes, you can aim and shoot, but can you aim walk in like turn like because I found that kind of weird in Metroid where it wants you to like turn a corner so you're using it and you can't really strafe and like to turn your head you have to like move the remote to the one side of the screen and just kind of hold it there and hope that it turns fast enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess for light gun shooters specifically, yeah, the Wii has a lot of great ones, and Sega ones specifically. Honestly, I can't recommend LA Machineguns enough. That game fucking rules. It's you're just kind of like in a little hover thing, and you're basically just shooting T-1000s and Terminators all over the place, and they're like in downtown LA and Vegas on the Strip, and
It sounds very hectic.
you're swooping around. Oh, it's so hectic. You're swooping around and you just have this machine gun that you're just blasting them. And and the way they take damage, if you hit a body part, and you have to shoot them a lot for them to die. Not a lot, but like they'll, kind of just stumble around and react to all your different shots, and then eventually they blow up. There's tons of explosions. You got like helicopters and tanks to blow up. It's just I don't know. There's something really kinetic about it that I love those games in the arcade and just playing them on the Wii. Honestly, I feel like House of the Dead remake has really made me interested in going back and playing a lot of other light gun games, but
it made me think about it like the other day too when you guys when we were all talking about it, with light gun games, and I'm like, I felt like I was like, oh well, what happened to light gun games almost like, for a while you're like, well, what happened to like fighting games or what happened to first person shooters? There's always been like that time in history where a certain kind of game's been like air quote missing. And this seems like one of those times where House of the Dead remake made me go, well, what happened to light gun games? Like, did we just all stop playing them? Like, guns are bad suddenly? Like, America, seriously, level with me here. Like,
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the VR
Right?
space has a lot, right? Like, I think that's kind of where they migrated to because a lot of those setups are really natural fits for a light gun type game.
well, you don't have to set up like the weird, because I remember Time Crisis on Time Crisis 3. It had to come with like sensors that you had to attach to the TV because they couldn't figure out how to light gun with an LCD.
No, you're talking about Time Crisis 4. 3 was
Was
3
it?
was still a PS2 game. Time Crisis
was it?
4 was a PS3 game, and by the time it came out, I don't think the move had come out yet,
No.
and they actually released a proper light gun just for it.
Yeah,
I'm
you
speaking
got
from
it.
memory. Maybe I'm wrong on some details.
No,
but I
you're
think
100% right. You're 100% right.
yeah,
Nuno.
and because we had already moved on to HD TVs, that light gun didn't work the same way that traditional light guns work. And that actually brings me to a point that I wanted to talk about House of the Dead remake, because after first playing the remake, I went back to play the original one, both the original arcade version, not at an actual cabinet, but emulated on my PC, and also the Saturn version, Saturn port. And I realized something that had never bothered me before on those classic games, and now suddenly started to bother me a bit, which is the screen flashing. And that ties into the way light guns work. Traditional light guns, every time you press the trigger, the screen flashes white for a frame. And that's how the gun actually recognizes the point of the screen that you're pointing at. And that's related to how it's a fascinating topic. If the people listening in want to delve deeper into that, I'm sure there are articles and YouTube videos explaining it better than I can explain it here. But it basically has to do with the way that a traditional CRT draws the picture on screen. It basically draws the picture line by line from left to right, top to bottom, unlike a modern LCD screen that draws the entire picture at once, at the same time. And in order for the traditional light gun to recognize the place that you're pointing at, that you're shooting at, it had to flash the screen white every single time you press the trigger. So it's really not a good game for epileptics. And it had never bothered me before because it was just part of the gameplay. But now playing the originals and right after that playing the remake, I realized that, the remake is not flashing all over. And this is obviously not a criticism of the originals because that was the technology, that was the way light guns work. And I still think the way traditional light guns work is superior to the infrared substitute systems that we had after that for LCD screens. But the remake does have it gets rid of that. So you're not constantly having the screen flashing on your face.
Yeah, and the other thing I love in kind of modern advancements of LCD era light gun games is having the reticule just visible on screen for where you're pointing most of the time. That helps me a lot, and I love that games do that these days.
No, don't get me wrong.
I actually don't.
But I don't. I was
yeah?
just gonna say that.
All right.
I don't like the reticle. I wish it was like back in the day because like when you had the light gun, I feel that's just like a thing with the light gun being in your hand. You felt like it was more precise just in your hand. You knew what you were shooting at once you had your thing calibrated, and it works pretty spot on, right? So you're not really guessing. You're like, yeah, I'm shooting that zombie, pow, and it works, right? But with the LCD ones and the infrared, like the Wiimote and the reticule, like you can see it drag, right? When you move your hand back and forth, you can see that reticle kind of like drag across the screen, kind of where you were. So it kind of like, to me, like you need it. You do need it to play the game. Like, don't get me wrong, but with it there, I find it more distracting.
Yeah.
But I know with the modern game you need it. Otherwise, like you said, you wouldn't be able to find where you're pointing on the screen relative to where the game thinks it is and where you think it is. Like, I'm always off. Right?
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say. It's what I think as well. And you guys were just talking about the Wii and how the Wii was the last mainstream console to have a really strong library of light gun games, including ports of games that had never been ported to a home console before, and also a lot of original games. And I was just thinking to myself that I just couldn't get used. I had a Wii, I still have, it's just not plugged in and set up. I could never get into the Wii in terms of light gun shooters because the few that I tried, and I do admit that I never really insisted on it, but the few that I tried, they fell off from the fact that I had the reticule on screen. Because when you have a traditional light gun, you kind of go, at least I'm speaking for myself, I don't actually aim down the sights, although most light guns actually have some sort of sight. But I just go by instinct. After playing for a while, you kind of instinctively know where you're pointing at. And if you're a bit off, you can see the mark of your last shot, and you can adjust a bit to the left or right or up and down, whatever.
Yeah, I'm with you. I shoot from the hip all the time. That's
Mm-hmm.
way to go.
With the Wii, I could never get that instinctive feeling, and looking and having to look at the reticle. Well, I just praise playing these games on PC because you can aim with a mouse, and obviously you're aiming a reticule. You're moving a reticule around with a mouse. So you could say, well, the Wii is exactly the same thing, but it's not, because at least in my setup, and this could have been like an issue with my setup, like lag from my specific TV or something like that, but there was always a delay aiming the Switch. I don't know if it's the fault of the Switch or of my setup at the time, but that delay, that half a second delay, was enough to throw me off. And it just never felt good. And it's a shame, because you spoke about LA Machineguns, and I just couldn't let this pass, because I never actually played LA Machineguns, but I'm a huge fan of the previous game. LA Machineguns is basically a sequel to Gunblade New York, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a Model 2 game. It came out on the Sega Model 2, which is the same arcade board of House of the Dead 1. So it all comes around.
I love that.
And
That's great knowledge.
Gunblade New York is just what the way that you describe LA Machineguns is the way that you could describe Gunblade New York. You're hovering around supposedly on an helicopter, I think, and you're using a machine gun instead of a pistol, like in House of the Dead or in Time Crisis. You're using a submachine gun, and you're shooting at robots, so they take a lot of shots to put down, and they also break all over the place. So you have this visual feedback. Also, a bit like House of the Dead, the fact that House of the Dead had zombies instead of real people, and you could blow off their arms and their heads, and there was blood and bits of bodies everywhere. It had a really strong visual feedback. And that also happened with Gunblade New York and with LA Machineguns. And I also like Gunblade specifically because I had the chance way back in the early 2000s to actually play on the real arcade cabinet. And instead of the usual light gun that resembles a pistol that you pick up in your hand, you had something that resembled a submachine gun, like a giant version of an Uzi or something like that, that was connected to the handle of, if I remember correctly, I'm speaking from memory.
It was like a turret.
Yeah, a turret, exactly. So it was stuck, the bottom of the handle of the gun was stuck to the machine, but you could move it around. Well, that was the point, of course, you had to move it around. And then it vibrated like crazy. It had really strong force feedback. So the gun is vibrating in your hand. The robots you're just blasting pieces off of them. And it was just an immersive experience. There was so much visual and aural and physical feedback from the game. It was just like light games taken to the extreme. At the time, it felt that it was like a typical light gun game, but on steroids or something. And I just love that game to death. I love that game so much.
Yeah, same. I mean, I feel like playing them today. I played a lot of LA Machineguns back in the day in arcades. In fact, we have GameWorks in Seattle that closed a few months ago, but it was a big arcade that was originally opened, I think, as a collaboration between Sega and DreamWorks, and they had a few of them around North America. But they closed. This was one of the last ones that they had, and I think some other company or investment firm had long taken ownership over it. But they just announced that they're going to reopen it in I think July or something, and they have an LA machine gun cabinet that I'm hoping they're going to keep. I can't wait to go back to it. But in the meantime, the Wii version, surprisingly good. And also the Wii remote does vibrate quite a bit. So I think it does kind of capture that better than I was expecting, even if it's not perfect. But on that note, I think we will start wrapping up. And I think, honestly, we just got to do a light gun, like a Saturn or Sega light gun game episode, where we can talk about Virtua Cop 1 and 2, House of the Dead, maybe some of the Dreamcast ones. House of the Dead 2, I think I've appreciated a lot more in recent years as well.
These are short games, so maybe we could do that game club thing that we haven't done in so long.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe.
Confidential Mission's another good one.
We could play that terrible FMV game. What's it called? Crypt Killer or something?
I want that so bad. I don't know why. I want to play
Let's
Crypt
do it.
Killer so bad.
Actually, I think I was thinking of another one. It's not. I don't know whether it's. I know that there's a game called Crypt Killer, but I don't know if that's the game that I was thinking about. I was thinking about that zombie shooter where you're in Jamaica or something, or at least you have a
Corpse
character
Killer.
that's like typical Rastafari.
I think it's Corpse Killer because there's Crypt Killer.
Corpse Killer,
Corpse
Corpse
Killer.
Killer. That's it. That's it. Thank you. Thanks, Cam.
I think there's two of them. They're pretty close.
That game is so terrible. I actually played it on the Saturn. That game is so terrible and so good because of that. It's
Yeah.
it's a mess.
Well, I think we'll look forward to digging into them in an episode in the near future. I think with that, we will call this a day. Cameron, where can people find you?
At Sundane. On
All right,
anything.
just everywhere, everywhere,
On
and anywhere?
everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere.
That reminds me, I still need to see that up. Everything, everywhere, all at once. I really want to watch that. And then I think I would. I mean, the last movie I saw was Sonic 2, I guess, in the theaters. Oh, we should talk about that in a near future episode. And then Nuno, how about you?
Well, you can always check out the official Saturn Junkyard YouTube channel. I haven't uploaded in a while, at least new video content. Lately, our last uploads were just uploads of the podcast because some people like listening to them on YouTube instead of other platforms. But you never know. I've been on kind of sabbatical in terms of YouTube content. I've been focused on other stuff in my life, but it's not like the channel is dead, and you never know. I could always upload a new video. So yeah, look forward to that whenever it will be.
Yeah, totally. And also, we do have our blog, the SaturnJunkyard.blogspot.com. That is where our blog is hosted, and you can catch a lot of great stuff that Virtua Neptune has written. So check that out. I do some Dreamcast Junkyard stuff from time to time. I'm on a few of their podcasts, as well as I'll write stuff for that blog site as well. I recently did one about Sonic Adventure, which was talking about how much I enjoy that game as in the same way that I might enjoy an amusement park. So you can check that out. Otherwise, I am at Virtua Schlub on Twitter. I don't really do social media too much or too often anymore, but that's probably the one I do closest to regularly. So yeah, thank you all for listening. And Cameron, I don't know if you have any other parting thoughts.
At the moment, no, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm always like trying to think, should we like close the episodes with some topical, fitting
like outro or quote or
outro.
like
Yeah, something that's like a catchphrase or something pertaining to the topic of, I guess, House of the Dead. I don't know. So we're just gonna end it here, and yeah, fuck it.